Close your eyes for a second and imagine a giant clock. This isn't a normal clock that measures minutes or hours. This is the epoch clock, and every tick represents 10,000 years of human struggle, triumph, and transformation. If you were to compress the entire history of our species into a single 24-hour day, everything we recognize as civilization, the pyramids, the Roman legions, the moon landing, and the device you are using to listen to this, would occupy only the final few minutes before midnight. We spend our lives focused on the right now, but we are the tip of a massive pyramid built out of the experiences of billions of people who lived in worlds completely different from our own. Today, we are going to travel through every major historical time period in detail. We aren't just going to list dates. We are going to step into the boots of the people who lived through them. We are going to explore how we went from chipping flint in dark caves to building silicon chips in clean rooms. This is the ultimate guide to the human story, and by the end of this journey, you'll see that history isn't just a series of events in a textbook. It's a mirror showing us exactly who we are today. To start our story, we have to go back to the prehistoric era, specifically the Paleolithic, or the Old Stone Age. This is the longest chapter in the human book, spanning roughly 2.5 million years. For 99% of our history, this was the reality. You were a nomad. There were no cities, no farms, and no writing. Your entire world was defined by the movement of animals and the ripening of wild fruits. But don't mistake these people for primitive in the sense of being unintelligent. Their brains were just as large as ours. They mastered the most important technology in history: fire. Fire gave them warmth, allowed them to cook food which fueled brain growth, and provided a social center for storytelling. They developed complex languages, created breathtaking art on cave walls, and looked up at the same stars we see today, wondering what they were. This was a period of extreme resilience, where humanity survived ice ages and massive environmental shifts through sheer communal cooperation. Around 10,000 BC, everything changed. We entered the Neolithic Revolution, often called the New Stone Age. This is arguably the most important turning point in the history of our species. Someone, somewhere, likely in the Fertile Crescent of the Middle East, realized that if you put a seed in the ground and waited, you didn't have to go looking for food. The food would come to you. This led to the domestication of plants like wheat and animals like sheep and cattle. Suddenly, we weren't nomads anymore. We became settlers. We built permanent houses, which grew into villages, which grew into towns. This created a surplus of food, which meant for the first time in history, not everyone had to be a food gatherer. Some people could become builders, some could become priests, and some could become leaders. This specialization is the literal foundation of civilization, but it came with a price. Sedentary life brought new diseases, social hierarchies, and the concept of land ownership, which inevitably led to organized conflict. As we move into the Bronze Age, roughly starting around 3300 BC, humanity discovered the power of metallurgy. By mixing copper and tin, we created bronze, a metal far harder and more durable than stone. This period saw the rise of the first great river valley civilizations: the Sumerians in Mesopotamia, the Egyptians along the Nile, the Harappans in the Indus Valley, and the early dynasties in China. This is when history truly begins, because this is when we started writing things down. The Sumerians gave us cuneiform, and the Egyptians gave us hieroglyphics. They built massive structures like the ziggurats and the Great Pyramids, which stood as physical manifestations of their power and their connection to the divine. This was an era of massive trade networks. Tin from as far away as Britain was traded for gold from Egypt. It was a globalized world, long before we had a name for it. The Bronze Age eventually gave way to the Iron Age around 1200 BC. Iron was more difficult to smelt than bronze, but it was much more common. This democratized warfare and tools. Almost anyone could now have access to strong metal equipment. This was the era of the great empires that would define the classical world. In the Near East, the Neo-Assyrians built a military machine that dominated the region, followed by the massive and more tolerant Persian Empire. In India, the Vedic period laid the spiritual foundations for Hinduism and Buddhism. In China, the 100 schools of thought emerged during the Spring and Autumn period, giving us the wisdom of Confucius and Lao Tzu. This was a time of deep philosophical questioning. It was as if the human mind was finally waking up to its own potential. This leads us directly into the classical antiquity period, which most people associate with ancient Greece and Rome. Starting around the 8th century BC, the Greeks began to experiment with a radical new idea called democracy in the city-state of Athens. They gave us philosophy through Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, and they perfected the arts of drama and sculpture. Then came the Roman Republic, and later the Roman Empire, which managed to unify the entire Mediterranean world under one legal system and one language. Roman engineering, roads, aqueducts, and concrete created a level of infrastructure that wouldn't be surpassed for over 1,000 years. But it wasn't just the West. This was also the time of the Han Dynasty in China, which established the Silk Road and created a bureaucratic system of government based on merit that lasted for centuries. The classical period was an era of universality, where for the first time, people felt part of a massive, connected world. However, no empire lasts forever. The fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 AD marks the beginning of the Middle Ages, often unfairly called the Dark Ages. While the West struggled with the fragmentation of power into feudal manors, the East was flourishing. The Byzantine Empire kept the Roman flame alive in Constantinople, and the Islamic Golden Age began in the 7th century. Scholars in Baghdad, Cairo, and Cordoba were preserving Greek and Roman knowledge while making massive breakthroughs in algebra, medicine, optics, and astronomy. In China, the Tang and Song dynasties were inventing gunpowder, the compass, and paper money. In the Americas, the Maya and later the Aztecs and Incas were building incredible stone cities and calendars more accurate than anything in Europe. The Middle Ages weren't dark. They were a period of massive spiritual and cultural shifts, where the great world religions, Christianity, Islam, and Buddhism spread across continents, providing a common language of values for millions. As we move into the late Middle Ages, Europe began to change. Large-scale trade returned, and the growth of universities sparked a new interest in the physical world. This culminated in the Renaissance, starting in the 14th century. The word means rebirth, and it was exactly that. It was a rediscovery of the classical knowledge of Greece and Rome, but with a new twist: humanism. People began to celebrate the potential of the individual. This was the era of Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Gutenberg, whose printing press changed the world forever. Suddenly, ideas could spread faster than ever before. A monk named Martin Luther used this technology to start the Reformation, which challenged the absolute power of the Church and changed the religious map of Europe. Parallel to the Renaissance was the Age of Discovery, or the Age of Exploration. Starting in the 15th century, European powers like Spain and Portugal began to sail across the oceans in search of new trade routes to Asia. This led to the encounter with the Americas, a new world to the Europeans but an ancient and populated land to the inhabitants. This period saw the first true global exchange, the Columbian Exchange, where plants, animals, and unfortunately diseases were moved between the hemispheres. Tomatoes and potatoes went to Europe, horses and wheat came to the Americas. This era laid the groundwork for the modern global economy, but it was also marked by the devastating impacts of colonization and the rise of the transatlantic slave trade, a dark chapter that would shape the politics and social structures of the modern world for centuries. By the 17th century, we entered the Age of Enlightenment and the Scientific Revolution. This was a period where reason and observation became the primary sources of authority. Isaac Newton explained the laws of gravity, and philosophers like John Locke and Voltaire began to argue that all humans have natural rights. This wasn't just talk in coffee houses. These ideas directly fueled the Age of Revolutions. The American Revolution in 1776 and the French Revolution in 1789 challenged the idea that kings had a divine right to rule. They proposed instead that government should be by the people and for the people. This was the birth of the modern nation-state, and the beginning of the end for the old aristocratic orders. As the political world was being torn down and rebuilt, the physical world was undergoing an even more radical change: the Industrial Revolution. Starting in Great Britain in the mid-18th century, humanity learned how to harness the energy of fossil fuels. First coal, then oil to power machines. This shifted the majority of the human population from the farm to the factory. It was the largest migration in history. Railroads and steamships shrunk the planet, and the telegraph made communication instantaneous across oceans. The Industrial Revolution brought a massive increase in the standard of living for many, but it also created urban slums, environmental pollution, and a new kind of economic struggle between the working class and the wealthy elite. The 19th century was the peak of this industrial might, characterized by the age of imperialism. European powers, armed with superior technology and weapons, carved up much of Africa and Asia into colonies. This was a period of high Victorian confidence, where people believed that progress was inevitable. But beneath the surface, tensions were boiling. Extreme nationalism and a massive arms race were turning the world into a powder keg. The 20th century began with that powder keg exploding into World War I, a conflict that utilized industrial technology for destruction on a scale never seen before. The war destroyed 4 empires and left a generation scarred. This led to the interwar period, a brief, fragile time of cultural explosion in the Roaring '20s, followed by the crushing despair of the Great Depression. The economic collapse provided fertile ground for the rise of totalizing ideologies like fascism and communism, leading directly into World War II. This global conflict was the most widespread in history, and it ended with the birth of the atomic age. The world realized that for the first time we had the power to end civilization itself. This realization defined the Cold War, a decades-long standoff between the United States and the Soviet Union. It was a war of ideologies fought through proxy conflicts, space races, and nuclear brinkmanship. But the 20th century wasn't just about war. It was also the era of decolonization, where nations across Africa and Asia fought for and won their independence. It was the era of the civil rights movement and the space age, when humans finally left the cradle of Earth to walk on the moon. Most importantly, it was the beginning of the digital revolution. The invention of the transistor and the integrated circuit led to the birth of the computer, which would eventually transform every aspect of our lives. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and the collapse of the Soviet Union marked the beginning of our current era, the information age or the age of globalization. This period is defined by the internet, a global nervous system that has made the entire world's knowledge available in the palm of your hand. We are more connected than any humans in history. We have mapped the human genome. We have sent rovers to Mars. And we have created artificial intelligences that can write and create art. But we also face global challenges that no single nation can solve alone, from environmental shifts to the complexities of a globalized economy. Looking back at this massive timeline, we can see a common thread: the drive to overcome limitations. In the Stone Age, we overcame the limitation of the nomad's hunger. In the Bronze and Iron Ages, we overcame the limitation of stone. In the Age of Exploration, we overcame the limitation of the ocean. In the Industrial Revolution, we overcame the limitation of human and animal muscle. And today, in the Information Age, we are attempting to overcome the limitations of the human mind itself. History isn't just a list of things that happened back then. It is a living, breathing process that we are contributing to right now. Think about how much life has changed in just the last few ticks of the epoch clock. Only 100 years ago, most people had never been in a car or heard a radio. 200 years ago, most people couldn't read and had never traveled more than 20 miles from where they were born. 500 years ago, half the world didn't even know the other half existed. We live in a time of unprecedented abundance and connectivity, but we are the descendants of those who survived the famines, the plagues, and the wars of every previous period. We carry their DNA, and we carry their legacy. When we explain every historical time period in detail, we realize that stability is the exception, not the rule. The world is always in a state of flux. The great empires of the past, Rome, the Han, the Abbasids, the British, all felt permanent to the people living in them. They felt like the end of history. But history never ends, it only changes shape. Each period provides the tools and the problems for the next one. The Renaissance gave us the individual, which the Enlightenment gave rights to, which the Industrial Revolution gave power to, which the Digital Revolution gave a global voice to. One of the most fascinating aspects of this journey is seeing how the identity of a human being has shifted. In the Paleolithic, you were your tribe. In the Middle Ages, you were your faith. In the 19th century, you were your nation. Today, many people are struggling to figure out what they are in a world where those old boundaries are blurring. We are global citizens in a way that would be totally incomprehensible to a Roman centurion or a Neolithic farmer. We have a broader perspective, but perhaps a thinner connection to the local soil. We must also acknowledge the silences in history. For much of this timeline, the voices of the ordinary people, especially women and the marginalized, were not recorded. We know about the kings and the battles because they were the ones who paid the scribes. But the true story of humanity is found in the everyday lives of the millions who built the ships, farmed the land, and raised the children. Modern history is becoming better at uncovering these stories, giving us a more complete picture of the human experience. We are no longer just looking at the generals. We are looking at the grandmothers, the merchants, and the laborers. As we stand here in the early 21st century, we are at another major transition. Some call it the Fourth Industrial Revolution, where the physical, digital, and biological worlds are merging. We are tinkering with the building blocks of life itself and creating machines that can think. This is a period as radical as the Neolithic Revolution 10,000 years ago. We are moving from being a species that adapts to nature to a species that designs nature. This brings immense responsibility. The lessons of all those previous time periods, the dangers of hubris, the importance of cooperation, and the resilience of the human spirit are more relevant now than ever. The story of the past is also a guide to the future. By understanding the patterns of how civilizations rise and fall, how technologies disrupt social orders, and how ideas can reshape the world, we can navigate our own time with more wisdom. History isn't a straight line toward progress, it's a zigzag. We make mistakes, we backtrack, and we find new paths. But the overall direction has been toward a greater understanding of ourselves and our universe. We have gone from wondering if the moon was a god to knowing exactly what minerals make up its surface. Imagine if you could bring a Paleolithic hunter-gatherer to the modern day. They would be overwhelmed by the noise and the light, but they would recognize the human emotions. They would understand the love of a parent, the fear of the unknown, and the joy of a shared story. We are the same people, just with better tools. That is the most profound lesson of history. No matter how much our environment changes, whether we are living in a tent made of mammoth skins or a skyscraper made of glass and steel, our core human needs remain the same. The time periods we talk about are just labels we use to make sense of the chaos. The people living through the Middle Ages didn't know they were in the middle of anything. They were just living their lives. The people in the Renaissance didn't all wake up one day and decide to be reborn. These markers are for us, to help us see the big picture. And that big picture is one of incredible complexity and astounding creativity. We have taken a wild, challenging planet and turned it into a home for 8 billion people. Every historical time period is a chapter in a book that is still being written. We are the authors of the current page. The information age will eventually give way to something else. Perhaps the interplanetary age or the age of harmony. Whatever it is called, it will be built on the foundation of everything that came before. We are the inheritors of the Sumerians' writing, the Romans' law, the Renaissance's art, and the industrialists' power. We shouldn't take it for granted. It took thousands of years of trial and error to get us here. So, when you think about your place in history, don't feel like you are at the end. Feel like you are at the beginning of the next great chapter. The epoch clock is still ticking. Every decision we make about how we use technology, how we treat each other, and how we protect our planet is part of the historical record. We are the ancestors of the people who will be living in the year 3000. They will look back at us, the people of the early digital age, and they will explain our time period in detail. They will talk about our struggles to manage a global internet, our first steps toward renewable energy, and our attempts to build a more inclusive world. What will they say about us? Will they say we were the generation that managed to overcome our divisions and build a sustainable future? Or will they say we were the ones who were overwhelmed by the power we had created? That is the question of our time. Every historical period before us faced its own version of that choice. The Romans had to choose between their republic and their empire. The people of the Industrial Revolution had to choose between profit and human rights. Now it's our turn. History is a story of hope. It's a story of a species that, against all odds, kept moving forward. We have survived plagues that wiped out half the population. We have survived world wars. And we have survived the collapse of our greatest civilizations. And every time, we have come back and built something new. That resilience is our greatest asset. It's what allowed a small group of humans to walk out of Africa 60,000 years ago and eventually cover the entire world. As we conclude this deep dive into the history of humanity, take a moment to appreciate the sheer scale of the journey. From the first stone tool to the first step on the moon, we have come a long, long way. The past is a library of human experience, and it is open to everyone. The more we learn about it, the more we understand that we are not alone in our struggles. We are part of a grand, ancient, and beautiful tradition of being human. The clocks are ticking, the pages are turning, And the story goes on. We are the latest in a long line of dreamers and doers. The historical time periods we've explored are the map of where we've been. But where we go next is entirely up to us. The information age is just one more tick on the clock. What lies beyond for the next generation is the most exciting mystery of all. Keep your curiosity alive. Stay engaged with the story. And never forget that you are a living part of history. Every day is a chance to contribute something to the grand timeline of our species. We are the product of millions of years of effort, and we have the incredible privilege of being alive to see what happens next. The past is explained, but the future is wide open. Let's make it a good one. Thanks for walking through the centuries with me. It's been an epic journey. And the best part is, it's not over yet. There are always more stories to find, more cultures to understand, and more lessons to learn. History is the greatest adventure there is, and we are all right in the middle of it. Until the next tick of the clock, keep exploring and keep looking for the connections that bind us all together across the vast expanse of time.